The music had just softened to make room for the photographer's announcements when it happened. 1 second I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, adjusting my glasses to watch my son David twirl his new bride. The next second, those same glasses were flying across the polished oak floor, skidding beneath the feet of startled guests. Before we dive into her true stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. The sting on my cheek was sharp, but it wasn't the kind of pain that makes you cry out. It was the kind that burns deep, the kind that silences a room of 120 people who suddenly can't believe what they just saw. My daughter-in-law, Samantha, had raised her hand and slapped me across the face in front of everyone. I froze, pressing my palm against my cheek. At 70 years old, I had lived through the death of my husband, through long winters alone, through arthritis that made every morning a slow climb. But nothing had prepared me for the humiliation of being struck by the woman my son had just promised to cherish, for better or worse. Samantha's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Give me the keys, Margaret. Hand them over right now." The keys she wanted weren't to a car or to a safe. They were to my home, the modest 2-bedroom apartment on West Chestnut Street, where I had lived for 35 years. The place where David had grown up, where his father and I had painted the nursery yellow because we didn't want to know the baby's gender until birth, where every holiday picture on the wall carried the weight of family history. I bent down, my hands trembling, as I searched the floor for the shattered frames of my glasses. Around me, guests shuffled in awkward silence. Some stared at their shoes, others whispered into their drinks. No one moved to help, not even David. My son stood there, frozen eyes locked on the floor, as though if he didn't look at me, this scene would disappear. "You're not welcome anymore." Samantha continued, smoothing the folds of her designer gown as if nothing had happened. "David and I need privacy to begin our marriage. Your apartment is perfect for us while we shop for something better. It's selfish of you to hold on to it." Her words were laced with the kind of venom only youth can deliver, sharp, ungrateful, entitled. I had endured her barbed comments for months. She had mocked my thrift store clothes, laughed at my 10-year-old sedan, even rolled her eyes at the part-time hours I kept at the bookstore where I enjoyed staying busy. But a slap was something different. A slap was a line crossed. The ballroom felt suddenly cold, the air conditioner humming while my chest grew hotter by the second. Tears welled in my eyes, not from the pain of the slap, but from the realization that I had become invisible to my own child. My son had chosen silence over dignity, his and mine. As I rose to my feet, the conversations around me started again, low and poisonous. "Poor woman," someone whispered behind a napkin. "She should really be in a retirement home," another muttered their words, carrying that false sympathy that cuts deeper than cruelty. I held my purse tighter. That old black leather bag had been with me for years, worn at the handles, practical, not pretty, much like myself. Inside it was a cell phone, and on that phone was a number I hadn't dialed in over a year. My heart thudded as I realized what I was about to do. The decision formed in me like steel cooling into shape. This was the last humiliation I would ever allow. I had protected David for far too long, shielded him from consequences, convinced myself that love meant silence. But tonight, in this glittering room filled with champagne and chandeliers, I understood love required something else, boundaries. I stepped toward the exit, each click of my sensible shoes echoing louder than the string quartet in the corner. Samantha laughed behind me, probably retelling the slap to her bridesmaids as if it were a victorious joke. David stood by her side, head bowed, his tie, askew, a puppet waiting for someone else to pull the strings. I pushed open the heavy ballroom doors and felt the night air rush against my burning face. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone. I dialed the number by memory, the one I had sworn I would never need again. When the line clicked open, I whispered, my voice trembling but determined. "Harris, it's Margaret. I need you at the Willow Creek Country Club. Bring the documents. Tonight. It's time." There was a pause on the other end, then my lawyer's steady voice. "Are you sure, Mrs. Collins? Once we start this, there's no turning back." I turned to look once more at the golden windows of the ballroom where my only son was celebrating a marriage built on manipulation. My cheek still burned, but my resolve burned hotter. "I've never been more sure," I said, and with that I lowered the phone, clutching my purse like a weapon. The night was still, the stars scattered above me. In 30 minutes, everyone in that ballroom would learn who I really was. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. The ballroom lights sparkled like stars caught in crystal, but for me the glow had already gone cold. My cheek still pulsed from Samantha's slap, and though I had walked outside to make that fateful call, I found myself drifting back in. Not to join the celebration, I couldn't bear to, but to see with my own eyes the truth I had been refusing to admit for years. David, my son, my only child. When I returned to the edge of the room, he was standing beside his new bride, adjusting her veil, while guests gathered around them with champagne flutes. His hands shook slightly, a nervous tic he'd had since childhood. But his eyes never searched for mine. Not once. "Smile, David," one of Samantha's friends shouted as the photographer aimed his camera. And he did smile wide and hollow, as though the scene of his mother being struck and humiliated had never happened. I waited for him to come to me. I thought maybe after the toasts, after the photographs, he would slip away to check on me. But as the minutes passed, the silence from my son became heavier than the music, heavier than the chatter of oblivious guests. It was the silence of betrayal, not loud, not violent, but a silence that cut deeper than any words could. "Margaret, are you all right?" whispered Mrs. Franklin, an old family friend who had seen me slip back inside. Her face was pale, eyes darting between me and the happy couple. She reached for my arm gently. "I'm fine," I lied, steadying myself. "Don't cause a scene." She frowned. "Cause a scene? That girl just assaulted you. Why hasn't anyone called the police?" I shook my head. I couldn't explain it to her, not yet. If I pressed charges tonight, the story would be reduced to a single moment an old woman slapped at her son's wedding. They wouldn't see the years of manipulation that led to it. They wouldn't see the son who had abandoned his values at the altar of convenience. Samantha's voice carried across the room loud enough for me to hear, though she pretended not to be speaking to me. "A woman her age doesn't need so much space. It's selfish, really. David and I can put that apartment to better use." Her words rippled through the circle of guests, sparking nods from some uneasy glances from others. And David stood silently by his face, expressionless. That was the moment my heart broke, not from the slap, but from the silence. The boy I had raised, the boy whose knees I had bandaged, whose homework I had stayed up late to help finish, whose future I had sacrificed for, he could not lift his eyes to defend me. He was no longer my son. He was her husband, her echo, her shadow. The band began another lively tune, and guests clapped along as though nothing had happened. My humiliation had been absorbed into the fabric of the evening, brushed aside like spilled champagne. To them, I was already a footnote. I moved back toward the doorway, pressing my hand against the frame to steady myself. My body ached, not from age, but from the weight of recognition. For years I had told myself David was just overwhelmed, just trying to keep peace, just caught between two women. But tonight in his silence he had made his choice. He had chosen her, and with that choice he had lost me. Outside, the night air wrapped around me again, cool and sharp. I sat down on a stone bench beneath the oak trees that lined the country club's driveway. My phone buzzed in my purse messages of congratulations from neighbors who had seen the wedding photos on Facebook. I wanted to laugh at the irony. In that ballroom, I was being erased. Yet here under the stars, I felt something stir within me. Anger, yes, but also clarity. This wasn't only Samantha's betrayal. This was David's silence, David's cowardice. And if I stayed silent too, if I accepted this humiliation, then I would be betraying myself. The crunch of gravel made me lift my head. Mr. Johnson, my neighbor of 20 years, was approaching, his white hair glowing in the lamplight. "Margaret," he said softly, "I saw what happened. You don't deserve this." "No," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "But maybe I needed it." He frowned. "Needed it?" "Yes, to finally see the truth." The truth was bitter, but it was also freeing. For the first time, I understood that silence had cost me too much. Tonight, Samantha's slap had only been the spark. The real betrayal was the silence of my son, and that silence would no longer define me. The morning after the wedding, I sat in my kitchen with a chipped mug of coffee, staring at the pale light filtering through the blinds. My face still carried the faint outline of Samantha's hand, though it wasn't the bruise that hurt the most. It was the memory. The sound of silence when David said nothing. The sound of glasses clinking while my dignity shattered across the ballroom floor. I looked around at the apartment I had called home for nearly 4 decades. The walls were lined with old photographs, David in his baseball uniform, my late husband John grinning at a 4th of July barbecue, my parents dancing in the living room on their 50th anniversary. Every corner of this place told a story. To outsiders, though, it was just an outdated apartment. Faded curtains, a sofa that had lost its spring, a refrigerator that hummed louder than it should. Samantha had once wrinkled her nose and muttered, "This is where you live." She couldn't see the history. She could only see what it wasn't new, shiny, fashionable. And that was exactly how I wanted it. For years, I had carefully cultivated the image of a modest widow living on a fixed income. I drove a 10-year-old sedan, clipped coupons at the grocery store, and wore secondhand cardigans from the thrift store. Neighbors pitied me sometimes, offering casseroles in the winter or slipping gift cards into Christmas cards. I thanked them warmly, never correcting their assumptions, because what no one knew, not even David, was that John and I had built more than just a marriage. We had built security. John had been quiet, almost unremarkable to most people. He wore the same 2 suits to church for years, and he never boasted about his work. But behind that simplicity was a man who understood numbers, investments, and patience better than anyone I had ever met. He started with small things, buying a rundown duplex in his 20s, fixing it up on weekends and renting it out, then another property, then a small commercial building. By the time he passed away 15 years ago, John had turned our careful savings into a quiet portfolio real estate bonds and a nest egg that could have funded a life of luxury if we had wanted it. But John always told me, visible wealth attracts problems. Invisible wealth gives you freedom. I never understood how prophetic those words were until now. The bookstore job I kept wasn't because I needed the paycheck. It was because I loved books, loved the smell of paper and ink, loved chatting with regulars about their favorite authors. The old sedan I drove wasn't because I couldn't afford something new, it was because I didn't want to draw attention. And the thrift store cardigans, I wore them because they were comfortable, not because I lacked the means. For years I believed that living simply would shield me from envy, from greed, from exploitation. But greed doesn't need a mansion to find its way in. Sometimes it comes wearing a white wedding dress and a practiced smile. I thought of the folder Harris, my lawyer, kept locked in his office. Titles to 3 properties' financial statements showing balances I had never even told David about, and the will John and I had drafted long ago. To the world, I was an aging widow with nothing but a pension. In reality, I had more than enough to make a difference, to change lives if I chose to. And yet, as I sat there sipping coffee from my chipped mug, I wondered if perhaps I had made a mistake. By hiding the truth, had I raised a son who believed I was weak? Had I made it too easy for Samantha to see me as disposable? I pressed my hand against the cool surface of the kitchen table. No, I thought. I wasn't weak. I was cautious. I was protective. But now it was time to stop hiding, not for the world's sake, but for my own. The slap had pulled back the curtain I had so carefully hung. And once a curtain is pulled, you cannot pretend the stage is empty. I stood, poured the rest of the coffee down the sink, and looked at the photo of John on the mantel. His smile seemed to carry both comfort and challenge. "You were right," I whispered. "But now it's my turn to use what you built, not to protect us from strangers, but to protect myself from family." The mask of modesty had served me well. But masks are meant to come off eventually, and when mine did, David and Samantha would learn that the woman they dismissed as powerless had more strength and more resources than they could ever imagine. The night of the so-called family meeting still lingers in my memory like a thundercloud that never quite drifts away. It was 2 weeks before the wedding, a Thursday evening, when the air outside smelled of rain. I had set the table with my plain white dishes and brewed a pot of tea, expecting nothing more than a casual visit from David and Samantha. But when I opened the door, it wasn't just the two of them. Standing on my porch were Samantha's parents, Richard and Elaine Dawson, both dressed as if they were attending a board meeting rather than stepping into a widow's modest apartment. Richard's handshake was firm to the point of aggression, and Elaine's eyes swept over my living room as though she were already calculating its market value. "We thought it best to have a conversation as a family," Samantha said smoothly, her voice carrying a rehearsed sweetness. "About your future, Margaret." "My future?" As if it belonged to them. They sat around my table, sipping tea with tight smiles, while I folded my hands in my lap. David stayed quiet at first, glancing between me and Samantha as though waiting for cues. He looked tired, but not in a way that stirred my sympathy, tired in the way of a man who had surrendered his will long ago. Elaine was the first to begin. "Margaret, at your age, living alone in such a large apartment is... well, it's not practical. It's dangerous even. What if you fell? What if no one found you for days?" I smiled politely, though my knuckles whitened against the teacup. "I've managed just fine for 70 years, Elaine." Richard leaned forward, his elbows claiming space on my table. "Be that as it may, it's time to make responsible choices. Samantha and David are starting their life together. Your apartment would give them a safe, stable place to begin while you transition somewhere more appropriate." "Appropriate," I repeated softly, though a storm was already brewing in my chest. "Yes," Samantha chimed in, pulling a glossy brochure from her handbag. She laid it on the table as if it were evidence in a trial. "There's a wonderful retirement community just outside the city. Meals provided, medical staff on site, lots of social activities. You'd never be lonely again." Lonely. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. These people had no idea how rich my solitude had been, how full of books, neighbors, memories, and quiet joys, and what I asked carefully would become of my apartment. An uncomfortable silence followed. Richard cleared his throat. Elaine shifted in her chair, and Samantha, bold as ever, smiled her thin smile. "Well, naturally, David and I would take care of it. It only makes sense." My eyes moved to David. I searched his face for a flicker of protest, a spark of the boy who once defended a classmate from bullies on the playground. But all I saw was his head lowering, his lips pressed into silence. "You'd throw me out of my own home?" I asked finally. "No one is throwing you out," Elaine insisted quickly. "We're helping you transition. You'll be more comfortable, safer." But their rehearsed words rang hollow. I could see the calculation in their eyes, the greed tucked between every sentence. This wasn't about my safety. This was about square footage, about a prime address, about money. I set my teacup down with deliberate care. "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse pounded in my ears. "But I am not moving. This is my home, and it will remain mine." The Dawsons exchanged a glance, an entire conversation in silence. Samantha's smile faltered for the first time. And David, my son, whispered the words that struck harder than any slap could. "Mom, maybe they're right." The storm inside me broke. Not in shouting, not in anger, but in a cold, cutting clarity. I saw it all then, the months of subtle comments, the orchestrated campaign, to make me doubt myself, the pressure building, drop by drop, until this staged ambush. They thought they were wearing me down. They thought I would fold quietly, hand over my keys, and thank them for their cruelty disguised as kindness. Instead, I stood. "This conversation is over. You may all leave my home." Samantha tried to protest, but I raised my hand. "Now." For a moment, none of them moved. Then one by one they rose from their seats, their eyes flashing with frustration. Samantha gathered her brochures. Elaine tightened her shawl, and Richard muttered something under his breath. David trailed last, his shoulders slumped. He wouldn't even meet my gaze. As the door shut behind them, I leaned against it, breathing hard. The gathering storm had broken, but not over me, over them, because in that moment I knew I would no longer play the fragile widow. The mask was slipping, and soon they would see the truth. And when they did, they would regret underestimating me. The night after the family meeting, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet, but my mind was loud, filled with Samantha's thin smile, Richard's appraising eyes, Elaine's rehearsed sympathy, and worst of all, David's silence. For years, I had brushed off little red flags, a lost paycheck here, a credit card bill. David asked me to co-sign just this once Samantha's constant interest in what things were worth. I told myself it was normal. I told myself they were young, starting out trying to build a life. But after that ambush in my own home, I knew better. By morning, I had made a decision I needed answers. Not guesses, not suspicions, facts. That afternoon, I called the one man I trusted more than anyone outside my family, Thomas Harris, my late husband's old friend and our longtime attorney. He had been by John's side when we bought our first property, and he had handled every legal matter since. A man of quiet words and steady eyes. "Margaret," he said when he picked up his voice low and professional, "it's been too long. I'm afraid I need your help again, Thomas," I told him. My voice trembled, but I steadied it. "I want you to look into David and Samantha. Finances, debts, loans, everything." There was a pause. "You're asking me to investigate your own son?" "I'm asking you," I corrected, "to help me see the truth. Whatever it is." He sighed, then agreed. "I'll need a few days." Those days crawled by like years. I went about my routines, watering the plants on the balcony, walking to the corner store, folding laundry, but everything felt heavier. Each time the phone rang, I jumped. Each night, I prayed John could somehow whisper guidance from wherever he was. Finally, 3 evenings later, Thomas arrived at my apartment with a leather briefcase. He set it on the kitchen table, the same table where the Dawsons had staged their ambush, and looked at me with eyes that carried more sorrow than surprise. "Margaret," he said gently, "you were right to ask." I braced myself. "David and Samantha are drowning," he continued. "They've maxed out 4 credit cards. They're behind on rent 3 months. The cars they drive are leased at payments higher than their combined income can realistically cover. And the wedding—" He opened the folder, sliding a document toward me. "The ballroom, the catering, the flowers, it's all financed with loans they can't repay." I stared at the numbers. $50,000 for one night of celebration. My stomach twisted. "They don't have a plan to pay it back," Thomas went on. "From what I can tell, their only plan was you." The words landed like stones in my chest. "And it doesn't stop there." He flipped to another page. "I found inquiries David made to banks asking about loans against senior property, even preliminary questions about guardianship petitions. If you were ever declared mentally incompetent, he'd have access to everything." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My son, the boy. I had rocked to sleep, the boy who had once wept over a lost puppy, the boy who had promised after John's funeral to always take care of me, had been planning a future where I was stripped of my dignity and my home. My throat closed, but no tears came. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Clarity. "They've already shown their hand," Thomas said. "That meeting at your apartment was step 1. The rest would have followed." I closed the folder slowly, pressing my palm against the cool paper. "Then, it's time I show mine." Thomas studied me for a moment. "Margaret, once this begins, there's no turning back. They'll see a side of you they never imagined." "Good," I replied, my voice firm. "They think I'm fragile. They think I'm powerless. It's time they learn the truth." That night after Thomas left, I sat on the balcony with John's photograph in my lap. The city lights blinked below like restless stars. For years I had lived quietly, modestly, believing that simplicity would shield me from envy and greed. But now I saw what John had seen all along. Wealth is safest when it's invisible. But sometimes invisibility is a weapon too. The investigation had given me what I needed: proof, facts, ammunition. And with that, I began to plan. The slap at the wedding had been the spark. The ambush at my kitchen table had been the thunder. But this was the lightning, and the storm had only just begun. 3 nights before the wedding, the phone rang just after sunset. I almost didn't answer. My evenings had become sacred quiet hours, spent with tea, a book, and John's photo watching over me from the mantel. But when I saw David's name glowing on the screen, my heart betrayed me. I picked up. "Mom," he began, his voice softer than I'd heard in months. "Can I come over? Just for a little while?" I agreed, though. Every instinct told me not to. 20 minutes later, he arrived alone, or so it seemed. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his face pale as though sleep had abandoned him. For a fleeting moment, I saw my boy again, the boy who used to crash on the couch after football practice, who once fell asleep at the dinner table with mashed potatoes still on his spoon. "Sit," I said gently, gesturing to the kitchen table. He did, but his hands wouldn't stay still. They drummed against the wood, then twisted together, then rubbed his forehead as though he could massage courage into himself. "Mom," he said finally, "I know things have been tense. I know Samantha comes across strong, but she just wants what's best for us. For me. For the family." I didn't answer. I let the silence stretch. He swallowed. "The truth is, we're in trouble. The wedding, it's bigger than we planned. The bills are piling up. The apartment, the cars, we can't keep up." "And you thought my apartment would solve that," I said, flatly. He winced, but didn't deny it. "It would give us breathing room, just until we're on our feet. You could be in a safer place, Mom. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I leaned forward. "I have never worried about myself, David. I have worried about you, and what I see now is a man willing to sell his mother's dignity for a month's rent." He flinched. "It's not like that." Before he could finish, the doorbell rang. My chest tightened. He hadn't come alone, after all. I opened the door to find Samantha. Her smile brittle, her eyes sharp as glass. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "I thought it would help if we all talked together." David shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Samantha set her purse on the table and slid out another stack of glossy brochures. "There's still time to make this right. We found a wonderful community just an hour away. Pool gardens, book clubs. You'd love it." "And my apartment?" I asked. Her smile didn't waver. "It wouldn't have to sit empty. We'd keep it in the family, take care of it until the time came when you wouldn't need it anymore." Her words chilled me more than any winter wind. Until the time came, as if I were already half buried. I looked at David. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His silence spoke louder than her words. "You think I'll just hand it over?" I said quietly. "Because I'm old. Because I love my son. Because you mistake kindness for weakness." "Margaret," Samantha said, her tone tightening, "don't make this harder than it has to be. You've been alone too long. You need care. We're offering it." "No," I corrected. "You're demanding what isn't yours, and David is letting you." For a heartbeat, her mask slipped. Her eyes hardened, her jaw clenched, and her voice dropped its sugar. "You can't stop what's coming. One way or another, we'll have that apartment." I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Then you'll learn something about me tonight, Samantha. I don't bow to threats. Not from you, not from anyone." I opened the door wide. "Out." She froze, but I didn't move. I waited. Finally, David stood, shame written across his face. "Come on, Sam." As they walked out, Samantha leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Don't underestimate me, Margaret. After Saturday, everything changes." The door clicked shut. I stood there, my hand on the knob, my heart pounding, but my resolve stronger than ever. The last attempt had failed, and now the battlefield would be the wedding itself. The ballroom glittered that evening, as though nothing in the world could touch it. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, the air hummed with music from a string quartet, and servers in white gloves floated through the crowd with trays of champagne. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, and snapped photos in front of floral arches that had cost more than my first car. I stood quietly near the back, dressed in my simple navy gown, holding my small handbag as though it were armor. I told myself I had come to honor the day, David's wedding, the day a mother should be proud. But in truth, I came because I needed to see for myself just how far they would go. Samantha glided through the room in her ivory gown, every sequin catching the light like fire. She smiled at her guests, kissed cheeks, posed for photos. To everyone else, she was radiant. To me, she was a hawk circling prey. When her eyes found me across the room, that smile sharpened. She whispered something to David, who looked at the floor, then began walking toward me. "Mom," he said softly, "she wants the keys." My heart dropped. "Here. Now it'll be easier this way," he murmured, his voice hollow. "Just give them to her. We can avoid a scene." I stared at him, barely recognizing the man in front of me. My son, my only son, asking me to hand over my home as casually as if it were a wedding favor. "No," I said simply. The words seemed to freeze the air. Samantha swept forward, her gown rustling like silk thunder. "Margaret," she said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "do you have the keys?" Dozens of eyes turned toward us. I felt my cheeks flush, but I stood straighter. "No, Samantha, this is neither the time nor the place." Her smile vanished. She held out her hand. "You're done clinging to something you can't handle. A woman your age doesn't need that much space." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Did she just say that to her mother-in-law?" I felt my hand tremble, but I kept it by my side. "This is not your decision to make." And then it happened. The slap came so quickly, I didn't even see her hand rise. My glasses flew from my face, crashing onto the marble floor, the sound shattering the silence that followed. The sting of her palm burned my cheek, but the greater pain was the weight of 130 pairs of eyes watching, judging, whispering. Some looked away embarrassed. Others leaned closer, hungry for scandal. No one moved to help me, not even David. I crouched to pick up the pieces of my glasses, my fingers shaking. Samantha's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. "That's what you get for being selfish. You're not welcome here anymore. Ethan and I need privacy to start our life. Your apartment will be perfect for us while we look for something better." The silence that followed was suffocating. Guests sipped their champagne with forced indifference, pretending not to see. David kept his eyes fixed on the floor. I rose slowly, tears streaking my face, but something inside me shifted. The humiliation had broken something open, not my spirit, but my restraint. I looked around the ballroom at faces filled with pity or curiosity, and I realized the mask I had worn for decades no longer served me. The poor widow, the fragile mother, the woman who could be pushed aside without consequence, that version of me had died with the crack of Samantha's hand against my cheek. Without a word, I walked toward the exit. The music faltered. The whispers grew louder, but I kept moving. I could hear Samantha behind me laughing, telling her bridesmaids she had put me in my place. At the doorway, I pulled my phone from my purse. My hand still shook, but my voice was steady when I dialed. "Thomas," I said when he answered. "It's Margaret. Bring the documents to the Royal Oaks Ballroom. Tonight." He hesitated. "Margaret, once this begins, there's no turning back." I finished for him. "I know. 30 minutes. I hung up and stepped into the cool night air. The street lamps cast long shadows across the parking lot as I walked to my old sedan, every step heavier and sharper than the last. For the first time in years, I felt something fierce stirring in my chest. Not grief, not fear. Power. They thought they had humiliated me, but the real performance was yet to begin. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound when I stepped back into the ballroom. The music had stopped, the laughter had died, and the guests turned as one toward the doors. Beside me walked Thomas Harris, his leather briefcase under one arm. His calm presence steadied me. I could feel the weight of every gaze, 130 witnesses waiting to see what the humiliated old widow would do next. Samantha stood at the center of the dance floor, her dress glittering under the chandeliers, her smile frozen in disbelief. "What are you doing back here?" she demanded. "Haven't you caused enough drama for one night?" Her voice carried the brittle edge of someone who suddenly felt the ground shift beneath her feet. I didn't answer. Instead, I nodded to Thomas. He stepped forward, his voice clear and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "forgive this interruption. My name is Thomas Harris. I am the legal and financial advisor to Mrs. Margaret Cole." A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Several guests whispered Thomas had represented some of the wealthiest families in Chicago for decades. His presence alone suggested that what was about to happen was not trivial. David pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "Mom, what is this? Why is he here?" I met his eyes for the first time that night. "To reveal the truth, David. The truth you've tried so hard not to see." Thomas opened his briefcase and withdrew the first document. "Mr. David Cole, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantees your mother has quietly provided for your lease, your credit accounts, and certain other expenses are terminated effective immediately." Gasps spread across the room. What David stammered. "What is he talking about?" Thomas did not pause. For the past 3 years, Mrs. Cole has transferred a total of $162,000 to cover your rent, credit card payments, insurance, and other living expenses. Funds you believed came from work bonuses, tax refunds, or sheer luck. Murmurs turned into a low roar. Phones were raised. Guests were already recording. Samantha's laugh was sharp, desperate. "That's ridiculous. She works at a flower shop. She drives an old car. She's a poor widow living on scraps. How could she possibly have that kind of money?" That was the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Appearances deceive, Samantha. Your father-in-law, John, built a quiet empire through years of careful investment. We chose modesty, not poverty. We believed privacy was protection." I let the silence stretch, then continued. "But tonight, I am done protecting people who mistake kindness for weakness." Thomas raised the second document. "Furthermore, the payment guarantee for this very celebration, ballroom catering, flowers, music, has been withdrawn. The management is free to demand immediate settlement." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. A few guests instinctively moved toward the exits. David staggered back as though struck. You paid for this. All of it. For 3 years I kept you afloat," I said quietly. "And tonight you stood by while your wife slapped me in front of everyone." Samantha's face twisted. "You can't do this. We're family. He's your only son." "Family," I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. "Family protects. Family respects. Family does not conspire to strip a mother of her home." I reached into my own purse and pulled out the final piece, the deed to my apartment. "This is mine. It will remain mine. And tomorrow new documents will be signed transferring every inheritance I once planned for David into trusts that protect seniors from abuse." The words landed like a thunderclap. Samantha's mouth opened, then closed. David's face crumpled into horror. Around us, the guests had gone utterly silent, caught between shock and fascination. Some nodded in approval. Others simply stared their phones, capturing every word. I felt taller than I had in years. My cheek still burned from the slap, but inside I was steel. "This," I said firmly, "is what happens when you confuse dignity with weakness." Tonight, the mask comes off. The ballroom stood frozen, 130 witnesses to the moment I reclaimed my name. The chandelier still glittered above us, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted. The celebration had curdled into something tense, electric, like a storm about to break. Guests clutched their glasses tighter, their whispers swelling into waves that rolled across the room. At the head table, the ballroom manager, Mr. Anderson, a burly man in a black suit, rose from his seat. His jaw was tight, his expression professional, but cold. "Mrs. Cole," he said, voice echoing through the hushed hall, "is it true that your guarantee for tonight's event has been withdrawn?" Thomas stepped forward smoothly. "Correct. All financial obligations connected to this event are no longer the responsibility of my client. The contract grants her that right." Gasps rippled. Guests turned eyes darting between the bride and groom as if waiting for them to pull out a miracle. Samantha's composure cracked. She stumbled forward, her veil slipping over one shoulder. "You can't just shut this down. This is my wedding day." Her voice broke into a shrill wail. Mr. Anderson remained unmoved. "Then, ma'am, someone else will need to cover the outstanding balance of $53,000 by tomorrow morning. If not, I have no choice but to suspend service." A heavy silence followed. $53,000. The number dropped like a lead weight. Some guests rose discreetly from their chairs, murmuring about babysitters at home, early mornings at work. Others pulled out their phones, already posting on social media. David turned to me, his face pale. "Mom, please," he whispered hoarsely. "Don't do this. Not here. Not like this." I met his eyes. "Not here, David. It was here that you stood by while I was humiliated. It was here that your wife struck me in front of everyone, and it is here that the truth will stand." He opened his mouth, but no words came. Samantha whirled on him, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Do something! Fix this! She's destroying us!" But David only crumpled, sinking into a chair as though the weight of his choices had finally landed. Across the room, Samantha's parents shifted uncomfortably. Her father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately." I turned my gaze on him, sharp and unflinching. "You had no problem confronting me in my own home, suggesting I was unfit to live alone. You staged an ambush to pressure me into giving up my apartment. That was public. This will stay public." The crowd murmured approving nods, flickering through the sea of faces. For once, I was not the one shrinking in shame. Samantha's voice rose again, high and desperate. "This is insane. You're just a bitter old woman trying to ruin the happiest day of my life." "No," I said evenly, my voice carrying across the ballroom. "I am a mother who finally decided enough is enough." A cheer broke out from somewhere in the back, a single clap, then another, until half a dozen guests were applauding. Others simply stared, but the tide had shifted. The humiliation was no longer mine. Mr. Anderson approached the couple with a clipboard. "Payment arrangements must be made before midnight," he said curtly. "Otherwise, my staff will begin shutting down service." The string quartet quietly packed their instruments. Servers exchanged uneasy glances. The once grand celebration now resembled a sinking ship. I turned to Thomas. "We're finished here," I said softly. He nodded, gathering the documents back into his case. Together we walked toward the doors, each step echoing through the silent hall. As I reached the exit, I paused, turning back one last time. David's head was in his hands. Samantha sat frozen, her perfect gown wrinkled and stained with tears, her kingdom collapsing around her. "This is not revenge," I said, my voice steady. "This is consequence. You mistook my kindness for weakness. Tonight you learned the difference." Then I stepped into the cool night air, leaving behind the ballroom, filled with whispers, shattered illusions, and the bitter taste of regret. The morning after the wedding, my apartment felt unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, when debris still litters the ground, but the winds have died down. I stood on my balcony, coffee mug in hand, watching the early traffic hum along the street. The same city, the same skyline, but I felt like I had crossed into a different world. The phone rang before I finished my first sip. I didn't need to look at the caller ID. I knew it was David. For 3 days the calls kept coming. First angry, then pleading, 37 in total. Sometimes Samantha's number appeared, followed by text messages dripping with hysteria. "You're destroying us. How could you humiliate us like that? If you love David, fix this." I deleted each one without reply. By the 4th day, Samantha's parents knocked on my door. Her mother's smile was tight, her father's eyes cold. "Mrs. Cole," he said stiffly, "this has gone far enough. You embarrassed our family in front of everyone. Do the right thing and repair the damage." I stood in the doorway, calm but unmovable. "The right thing," I replied, "was teaching your daughter that greed has a cost." Then I shut the door before they could answer. That evening, Joseph knocked instead. My neighbor of 20 years, widower like me, carrying a paper bag from the local bakery. "Brought you scones," he said, his voice warm. "You look like you could use some company." I hadn't realized how much I needed it until I saw his kind eyes. I invited him in, and soon we were sitting at my kitchen table with tea and pastries. I saw the videos, Joseph admitted, lowering his voice. "Half the neighborhood has. Margaret people are talking about you like you're some kind of hero." I blinked. "Hero?" He nodded. "Folks are tired of seeing elders treated like we're disposable. What you did? It gave people hope." The words sank into me slowly, heavier than the slap, heavier than the silence of my son. For so long, I had thought of myself as the burden, and now strangers were calling me brave. 2 days later, Thomas returned with updates. David and Samantha had been evicted from their apartment for non-payment. The ballroom had initiated legal proceedings to recover the $53,000 still owed. Their credit cards had been canceled. They're staying with Samantha's parents for now, Thomas explained. But it's tense. I almost pitied them. Almost. That night, as I watered the plants on my balcony, Joseph leaned over the railing from his side. "Don't let them drag you back into their chaos," he said gently. "You've earned your peace." Peace. The word lingered in my mind as I tucked the watering can away. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking in panic. On the 7th day, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper scrawled in David's handwriting. "Mom, please, don't abandon me." I didn't know it would go this far. I sat with the letter for a long time. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from the weight of choice. The son I had raised was still there, buried under layers of greed and fear. But whether he could claw his way back, that was no longer mine to decide. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and whispered to the empty room, "Not until you choose respect over convenience. Not until you see me as more than a bank account." For years I had lived quietly believing silence was the price of love. But now, in the quiet of my own home, I realized something profound. Silence could also be power, and this time, it was mine. 2 weeks after the wedding, the knock on my door was not Joseph with pastries, but a courier with an envelope stamped Cook County Court. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a petition. David, my son, was asking the court to evaluate my mental competency. His claim that I had shown irrational financial behavior and emotional instability on the night of his wedding. Samantha and several guests had signed sworn statements. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My own child was trying to strip me of the right to manage my life. I called Thomas immediately. Within an hour, he was at my kitchen table, papers spread between the teacups. "They're playing dirty," he said grimly. "But we've seen this tactic before. Families try to paint elders as incompetent when money is involved." I clenched my hands. "They want to take everything, even after all I've already done for them." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on mine. "Then we fight. But we don't just defend, we counterattack." The next days became a whirlwind of preparation. Joseph came by with his quiet strength, reminding me to eat when I got lost in stacks of paperwork. Amelia, my old friend in real estate, dug into Samantha's debts and produced a file thick with unpaid loans. And Lucy, my niece, who had always treated me like a second mother, collected videos posted online from the wedding night. The recordings told a very different story than David's petition. They showed Samantha slapping me. They captured her shouting about my apartment. They revealed David standing mute, head bowed, as I was humiliated. And then they showed me not irrational, not senile, but clear, calm, and precise as I laid out the truth. One clip had gone viral on social media. The caption read, "When kindness is mistaken for weakness." Millions had viewed it, thousands had commented with support. "Stay strong. My mother went through the same. Elders deserve respect." Thomas smiled when he saw it. Public opinion may not decide the law, but it influences judges more than they admit. The first court hearing was surreal. David sat on one side, shoulders hunched, eyes darting everywhere but at me. Samantha, perfectly groomed, whispered constantly to her lawyer, her gaze sharp as daggers. I sat with Thomas, my folder of evidence neatly stacked, Joseph and Lucy behind me like anchors. Their lawyer spoke first, painting a portrait of a confused old woman who lashed out in bitterness. She sabotaged her son's wedding, canceled payments without warning, and made erratic decisions that no rational adult would make, he declared. When my turn came, Thomas rose with quiet power. He laid out the bank statements, showing years of my financial stability. He presented the property deeds. He introduced the viral videos as Exhibit A. The courtroom watched in silence as the screen flickered to life, Samantha's hand striking my face, my glasses flying across the ballroom floor. Gasps rippled. When it was over, Thomas spoke simply, "This is not incompetence. This is abuse. and Mrs. Cole's only crime was refusing to be a victim. I expected shame, maybe even a flicker of remorse on David's face. Instead, he stared at the table hollow-eyed. The judge called a recess, but his expression was clear. David's case was crumbling. Outside, reporters waited. Microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Mrs. Cole. "Do you have a message for other seniors facing family pressure?" one asked. I hesitated, then found my voice. "Yes, don't be afraid to defend your dignity. Love should never mean surrendering your rights." The words echoed louder than I imagined. That evening, the clip aired on local news. Strangers began sending letters of support. The legal battle was not over, it would stretch on for months. But for the first time, I felt the tide turning. And deep inside, I knew win or lose, I had already reclaimed something more valuable than money. My voice, my worth. 6 months after the night that split my life into a before and an after, I found myself sitting on the balcony of the same modest apartment Samantha once mocked. The air smelled of lilacs I had planted with Joseph, and the late afternoon sun spilled gold across the rooftops. Everything looked familiar, yet I knew I had been transformed. I was no longer the timid mother afraid of confrontation. I was a woman who had discovered that silence, when broken with truth, becomes power. The court case had ended with clarity sharper than any knife. David and Samantha's petition to declare me incompetent collapsed once Thomas presented the evidence videos, financial records, and witness testimonies that revealed not weakness, but resilience. The judge's words still echoed in my ears. Mrs. Cole is not only competent, she is exemplary in her ability to manage her affairs. Justice was served, but justice did not erase the wound of betrayal. David never apologized, never wrote a letter, never called. In his silence, I heard both shame and defiance. He had chosen the easier road of resentment rather than the harder one of repentance. Yet even so, my heart could not stop loving the boy he once was. Love and grief became two sides of the same coin I carried daily. In those months, I poured myself into something bigger than my pain. With Thomas's guidance and Joseph's encouragement, I established the Margaret Cole Foundation for Elder Dignity. What began as a desk piled with folders in my living room soon grew into an office filled with voices, lawyers, social workers, counselors, all dedicated to protecting seniors from the very kind of abuse I had endured. I remembered the scripture from Job wisdom is with the aged and understanding in length of days, Job 12:12. That verse became the motto etched on our office wall. Too often society paints age as weakness, but I wanted the world to see that wisdom and endurance come with years. We were not burdens, we were bearers of light. Each case we took reminded me that my story was not an isolated tragedy. A 72-year-old widow pressured into selling her house by manipulative grandchildren. A man in his late 60s blackmailed emotionally by his daughter, who threatened to keep the grandchildren away unless he gave her money. Every file was a mirror of my own struggle. Yet as we helped each person reclaim their dignity, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than wealth or inheritance could ever offer. What David and Samantha had meant for harm God had turned for good. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, Lucy sat beside me with a cup of tea. She looked at me with admiration that felt both humbling and healing. "Aunt Margaret," she said softly, "do you realize you've become a voice for thousands? People aren't just listening to your story. They're drawing strength from it." Her words struck me deeply. For months, strangers had written letters, shared testimonies, and told me I saw myself in you. I realized then that my life had become more than just survival. It had become a testimony. Not fiction, not a parable crafted to entertain, but her true stories mine offered to the world so others could stand taller in their own storms. I knew I could not tie everything in a neat bow. David's absence remained a scar, and Samantha's bitterness lived on in rumors I chose not to answer. Yet scars are not only reminders of pain, they are proof of healing. And as Scripture teaches in Galatians, do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. They had sown deceit, manipulation, and greed, and what they reaped was collapse. I too had sown sometimes in fear, sometimes in silence, but when I finally planted seeds of truth and courage, what grew was freedom. To those listening now, perhaps from your living room, your kitchen, or your quiet porch, if you see your reflection in my story, know this: you are not alone. You have the right to dignity. You have the right to say no. You have the right to protect what you've built, no matter who demands otherwise. Age is not weakness. Age is wisdom, and wisdom, when coupled with courage, can move mountains. So tonight, as I close this chapter of my life, I want to leave you with both a challenge and an invitation. The challenge: do not let silence become a prison. Speak. Protect yourself. Stand firm, even if those you love turn away. And the invitation: join me in this mission. Share these lessons, tell your own truths, support those around you who feel voiceless. If my voice has reached you, let it not stop here. Leave your comments, share where you are listening from, and let us create a community where every senior knows they are valued. Because in the end, life is not measured by the wealth others try to take from us, but by the dignity we choose to guard. And if even one person tonight finds strength in her true stories, then every tear I shed, every betrayal I endured, will not have been in vain.